Hi, I'm Mike Mercer. I want to welcome you to Empower You. Tonight's discussion is going to be with Mike McCormick, and I think it should be a fascinating and really engaging discussion. Mike actually worked as a White House stenographer in the press office at the White House for 15 years, and he worked under Presidents Bush, Obama, and Trump. And since retiring from that position, he's written a number of books. And we'll be discussing his latest book, which was published this year. It's titled An Almost Insurmountable Evil, How Obama's Deep State Defiled the Catholic Church and Executed the Wuhan Plandemic. And basically, in his book, Mike walks through how the Obama-Biden administration worked through the Vatican to set up child trafficking, human trafficking across the southern border, and then also set up bioweapons research in Ukraine to cause problems there. Colluded with China to eventually, under Biden, launch the Wuhan Plandemic. So, as I mentioned, Mike was a White House stenographer for 15 years under President Bush, Vice President Biden, and President Trump. And he was really involved. Whenever there was an event that involved the press, Mike was there to sort of transcribe it or record it. And so he was in the Oval Office, the West Wing, and then he went around the world, really, on Air Force One and Air Force Two, and especially under Vice President Biden during Obama's administration. He's authored numerous books, and I want to mention a few of them. 15 Years, a Deplorable, a White House Memoir, Joe Biden Unauthorized, Young Jesus, that was published in 2021, The Case to Impeach and Imprison Joe Biden, and then his latest book, An Almost Insurmountable Evil. So, Mike, I'd like to welcome you to Empower You. We really appreciate your joining us.
Thanks, Mike, and hello, everybody at Empower You. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah. No, I think I might have first heard you on John B. Wells' show.
Whoa.
And I think, have you been on there more than once? I think you have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll be on
Okay.
there this Saturday.
Yeah. You were very engaging. It was very great discussion. So I really appreciate your joining us here. I thought we could start off, Mike, just explaining to the audience, because not everyone's going to understand completely what a stenographer does. If you could just give us a little more detail on what you did as a stenographer. We'd also love to hear, like something about what you did in each of the three administrations you worked under.
Sure. Well, so I started there in 2002. I was a stenographer in the court system here in DC, and I worked real hard. Our company, we were contractors. Our company had a contract with the White House. They said, if you work hard and do a good job, maybe we'll put you in the White House. Eventually they did. So 2002, I started there in the fall. I started working with Vice President Cheney, but at that time was rolling out the global war on terror, actually, invasion of Iraq. I did a lot of work with National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, and in the White House. And I traveled then with the White House. So back then, and our job was to be in the room when the president or the vice president or national security advisor was being interviewed by the press. So I didn't have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. I didn't have to worry about being top secret or classified. I wasn't classified. I never heard anything classified. So everything I saw and heard was basically what the White House wanted people to see and hear. The difference was I got to see what the press didn't talk about. That's what I put in my books, because the press has been, as we all know, stifling and suppressing the truth, really. And that's what I started seeing. And so I worked through the Bush administration. A couple of years, I took a job outside of the White House, came back after the economic downturn, the housing crisis, and then started back again in 2010. And then that's when, because Joe Biden was such a handful for office, they said, do you want to cover Joe Biden? We were still contractors. We want to earn the contract back in 2012. We're going to need to win it back. We need somebody good on him. Why don't you do it? And I said, okay. It was good for me. As the vice president stenographer, I didn't travel as much as the White House people. That was an election year, 2012. I didn't want to be gone every other night on a campaign swag. So that was good for me, but I did travel internationally. So I traveled with Joe Biden to Russia, traveled with Joe Biden to China, Ukraine, traveled with him all around Israel, a lot in 2016. And so what I got to, I don't think he knows me personally, but I got to see him behind the scenes, see how his staff worked with him. And one of the things that happened was, and so you mentioned my book, Joe Biden Authorized. So I started writing all these books. I actually got pushed out of the White House. I didn't retire. I was the old white guy, and they were surrounded by Obama-loving young people who didn't like me. And that was it. I voted for Trump. They didn't like Trump. So even though they were working for Trump, they didn't want a Trump person around. We've seen that throughout our country. And that's what prompted me to write these books, was the division that I saw in our country was reaching this point where people were willing to turn on their friends, turn on their family members over politics. And it was a lot of the reason I saw was because of how the press presented what was really happening in the White House. I wrote a couple books. Joe Biden Authorized came out in 2020. As soon as it came out, that's when the lockdowns hit. I didn't know at the time how bad he was behind the scenes. But because I wrote that book, I got a hold of a copy of the Hunter Biden laptop in the fall of 2021. So after Joe Biden gets elected, 2021, I got a copy of that. And I started looking into it.
I'm just curious, how did you manage to get a copy? How were you able to do that?
Well, the Garrett Ziegler, who's the leader of the Marco Polo group, it's a research group, it's a nonprofit. He reached out to me. He said, look, I've got a copy. He was working in the White House with Peter Navarro. He said, I've got a copy of the Hunter Biden laptop. I want you to have a copy. I said, what do you want me to do? Do you want to pay for it? How do I do it? He said, no, just have a copy. You buy yourself a laptop. I'll copy the contents of the Hunter Biden laptop onto your laptop, and then you use it as you see fit. So that's when I started writing my Substack, Midnight in the Laptop of Good and Evil. And what I did was I stayed away from all the yucky pictures, and I just focused on, because I travel with Joe, I focused on the email traffic between him and Hunter and all of his, and basically they're criminals, co-conspirators. It's all a criminal enterprise. And that's what I wrote in that book, The Case to Impeach and Imprison Joe Biden. I've been interviewed by the Congress, congressional investigators from the Oversight Committee and from the Senate Homeland Security Government Affairs Committee have interviewed me about what I found out about Joe Biden, and that's why we're here.
So the book that we're discussing, you basically get into three broad areas. All right. So, and these are things that the Biden, I guess the Obama and then the Biden administrations did, right? So one is the idea of opening up the border to facilitate human trafficking, right?
Right.
Another is setting up the bioweapons research labs in Ukraine, and we'll get into why. You provide insight into that. But then also, I guess, setting up the research in China in the Wuhan lab that ultimately led to the pandemic. And I'm just curious, was the laptop, the content on the laptop, the initial source for your insights into all three of those areas, or was it just like one or two?
The content in the laptop showed me what happened with Joe Biden, mostly in Ukraine. And because I traveled there with him 3 times. And that was where all the attention was. They were looking into impeaching Joe Biden. You know, the House was investigating what Hunter was doing. Hunter was on the board of the Burisma Holdings natural gas conglomerate. And so that's basically what that book is about. Looking into that, traveling with him. It's a step-by-step. It's a timeline of when that criminal activity began and how far into it basically is still ongoing. It's a conspiracy. They haven't admitted to it. So it's still ongoing. So that was the Hunter Biden laptop with Ukraine. But what also happened was with this book we're talking about, an almost insurmountable evil. But as I was promoting that book, the Ukrainian sort of the case to impeach and imprison Joe Biden, I got on a show with Alex Jones, and he started, and afterwards, I was promoting the book with him. And afterwards, I was watching his show, and he was talking about and this feeling of almost this just overwhelming evil. And it was a year ago. It was 2024 in the spring. They were doing this lawfare against Trump. There was just a feeling that something terrible was coming, and he was commenting on it. And I thought to myself, what's the most evil thing I remember from the White House? And it was the relationship between Joe Biden, who was always talking about this special relationship he had with this Catholic Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. Because Theodore McCarrick had turned out by 2018, was found out by the Vatican to be a longtime child molester, a rapist of altar boys and seminarians. And so I just said, you know what, I'm going to look into what was he doing in the White House? And I looked at the White House visitor logs, and his name popped up over and over again in strategic places. And I was like, look, this is a book. And I started writing about that in my Substack. And I just kept covering it. It was like uncovering this evil. And, you know, the thing is, I got in touch with Archbishop Vigano. He's an Italian archbishop. He's been excommunicated because he basically stood up against Pope Francis and the Catholic hierarchy and said, this guy McCarrick was an evil man, and you knew it, and you didn't do anything. And so I got in touch with him and told him who I was. What I told him was, Archbishop, we're telling the truth. And when you tell the truth, you're speaking God's word, because God's word is the truth. And if you're telling the truth and speaking God's word, God is on your side, and you can't lose. So I kept writing and finding all this stuff out. And I really think that behind me, God was pushing me into it. I really believe that.
Oh.
So that's what led to the book.
So Vigano gave you a lot of insight, information.
Yeah, he did. And
Wow.
he helped me, guide me. He was very encouraging. And I told him stuff, and he was like, wow. Yeah.
Well, you lay out in an almost insurmountable evil. You lay out Cardinal Carrick's background really effectively. I was wondering if we could just walk through that. Just walk through the story of Carrick and his relationship with Joe Biden,
Right.
and then how that evolved. I believe you make the case that that they were together. They helped get Pope Francis put in office.
So I first heard about McCarrick in the White House from President Bush. He talked about this guy, Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, all the time. And he was like the Catholic voice of comfort during 9/11 and the aftermath. And he was always in the White House. So I kind of knew who he was. He was the Bishop of Washington, very important position. He had a lot of contacts in Washington in the political arena. He was on the media all the time. And when Joe Biden became vice president, he was always talking about, hey, there's Cardinal McCarrick. We would do a reception at the Naval Observatory or something. So when I looked into the White House visitor logs, I knew there was a lot of interaction between them. I expected to see something. I didn't expect what I found. What I found was McCarrick was working so closely with Biden and Obama and their White House chief of staff, a guy named Denis McDonough, that it looked like they were plotting and planning a course of action and using the Vatican as what I call in my book the morality launderers. They used Pope Francis as a morality launderer. And McCarrick, I described him in the book as the Epstein of the Vatican, the Jeffrey Epstein of the Vatican. This is a guy who, as a young priest, was brought up through the ranks quickly. And I've since discovered that, part of what he was involved in, and this is what's in my Substack, part of what he was involved in was in the late 40s, he was in Switzerland, and he was in a town named St. Gallen. And the CIA was very active there. The CIA then was working with the Vatican. One of the chief super spies at the time was a guy named James Angleton. And Angleton has since come out in these JFK releases, this information releases, that Angleton described working closely with the Vatican, this guy Montini. Well, Montini became Pope Paul VI. And Pope Paul VI was the guy who basically pushed McCarrick up the ladder from being just a lowly priest to being a Monsignor, and then to being a Archbishop in New Jersey. And then along the way, he got pulled into the international swirl of Washington politics. He would travel to China for the Bush administration in the Vatican. He would travel to Iran for the Bush administration in the Vatican. Why was a guy who was just a simple priest, simple bishop from New Jersey doing all this international work?
So I don't know if you can answer this question. I don't want to put you on the spot, right? But I was actually raised a Catholic, but I don't actually know the difference, right? So just for the audience, if you know, what are a normal, so he was an archbishop, but then he became a cardinal. What's the difference in position and responsibilities? Do you have a sense for that?
Well, the archbishop, it all gets determined by the Vatican, by the Pope. So the Pope was his buddy, and he was very close to the Pope. McCarrick was a very prominent fundraiser. That was his secret sauce. He went to college at the Catholic University here in Washington, and then learned fundraising and took off as a fundraiser, and would get millions for the coffers of the Vatican. So they bumped him up the ladder. And what they did was they sent him around the world to spread this money around. Well, that's kind of what an intelligence operative does. If you're a CIA operative, you're going around the world with donors, quote unquote donors, and passing out money. And that's what McCarrick did. He passed out money to the poor priests and bishops in hinterlands out there.
So McCarrick starts off as an archbishop, a priest and an archbishop. He has these ties in Washington. I guess he eventually, you said he was in New Jersey, then he moved to Washington.
Right.
And then he gets tied in with the U.S. government, and he starts doing some work for them. Then he's elevated by the Vatican to cardinal, and he started doing even more, and he continued to do more throughout the Obama administration.
Right. He was a cardinal in 2001. He was the Bishop of Washington in 2001. He had to retire from being a cardinal because there was an age limit at 75. So he was 75 in 2006. He retired. But he became, because he was so close to the Vatican and to Democrats like Joe Biden, when they got into the White House, they started using him to go back and forth to the Vatican. He was their back door into the Vatican. And they had a plan. The Biden and Obama people saw the Pope Benedict, who was kind of conservative, as being somebody they had to get rid of. And that's what they used McCarrick for. They got rid of the Pope Benedict, and they used McCarrick to get the Archbishop or Cardinal Bergoglio from Argentina, Buenos Aires, Argentina, to be the Pope in 2013. In March of 2013, McCarrick was over in the White House setting all this up.
Wow.
He was over in the Vatican setting all this up. He moved from the White House to the Vatican setting all this up.
So what was why had they, it sounds like from your book, the Obama administration, if I'm remembering correctly, and McCarrick agreed that Pope Francis would be a good person to become Pope. Is that correct?
Yeah. They put him in. Yep.
Okay. So and why did they think that? Why did they feel that way about him?
I've got a Substack out right now, but Pope Francis, as a priest in Argentina, had an association with the right-wing dictatorship that was backed by the CIA. So I think Bergoglio, when he was the Cardinal of Buenos Aires, had the backing of the CIA down there. And I think McCarrick had the backing of the CIA up here, and the two of them, when they got together in the Vatican, were working that angle to do CIA business into the Vatican. I think that's what they were doing. And when McDonough and Obama and Biden came in, they empowered McCarrick to push Bergoglio up the ladder so they could use this Pope, and they did. So he gets elected in 2014. In the summer of he gets elected in March of 2013. In the summer of 2014, all these kids start showing up at the border of the United States from South America, unaccompanied minors, by the thousands. By the end of the summer, 60,000 kids had shown up there. One of the things that Joe Biden did, and this is Joe Biden specifically, because I traveled with him so much, he traveled to Honduras in 2012. There were government officials from Honduras that were smuggling cocaine into the United States at the time by the ton. They were part of the Sinaloa cartel. Joe Biden knew this. In 2014, he was doing business with the president of Honduras, a guy named Juan Orlando Hernandez, who was smuggling drugs into the United States by the ton. And he was aligned with the Sinaloa cartel. And Joe Biden brought that guy into the White House because they were having all these unaccompanied minors showing up. And he had other people from Central America, from Guatemala and El Salvador come in, the presidents of those countries. They met with Obama. They met with Biden. They set up something called the Alliance for Prosperity. Basically, American taxpayers gave these three little South American countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, $1.5 billion from 2014 to 2016. And what they did was they basically opened that was laying the foundation for the cartels to traffic drugs and people into the United States. A week after Joe Biden meets with this guy, Juan Orlando Hernandez, in the White House, Cardinal Theodore McCarrick comes in the White House 3 weeks in a row and meets with Denis McDonough. Denis McDonough is the White House chief of staff. His office is right next to the Oval Office. It's in between the Oval Office and the Vice President's office. They were all involved in this. And what they were doing is taking hundreds of millions of dollars and passing it on to the cartels, our taxpayer money. And they did that from 2014 to 2016. And what stopped them was the election of President Trump in 2016. Tom?
So I was going to ask you, so when that big surge of kids showing up at the border, was that after Biden implemented this Alliance for Prosperity and began giving them all the money, or did they notice the surge of children and then implement this Alliance for Prosperity?
Yeah, it was a crisis. And like they said, never let a crisis go to waste. I think the crisis was put together by the CIA and the church. I think they told all these families down there, send your kids to the border, they'll let them across. And these families put their kids with these coyotes and the cartels. Terrible things happened to those kids, but they came across anyway. And then because it was such a crisis, they got all this money and they gave that back to the cartels and to themselves, really. They trafficked it back in the cartels. It was like a backdoor deal. That's what happened.
What do you feel the motivation was for Obama and Biden to support this?
And it wasn't, and so also the Vatican was supporting it. Pope Francis at the time became the migrant pope. He was talking about open border migration for Europe. That's what happened that's what's going on right now in France, England, Ireland, all of Europe, except for Hungary, is suffering from this open border that the Pope emphasized and promoted. And he said it also on the southern border. They were working on the southern border to help to sort of give, morality longer this operation, this Alliance for Prosperity. What happened was Trump pops up, and the Pope got into an argument with Trump. He basically, in February of 2016, Pope, probably at the request of Obama and Biden, goes to Mexico and does an event, and he's pointing at the border. He says, we have to let migrants go across the border. On the flight home to the Vatican, a reporter asked him, what about this businessman in America, Donald Trump, who's running for president? He says, we'll build a wall. And Pope Francis says, I don't know this man, but if he's saying we should build walls, not bridges, I don't think he's a good Christian. He said that about a presidential candidate in February of 2016. Started an argument. They backed away from the argument, but clearly he was against Trump. So this is what Trump did when he got elected. He put up the wall. It became a huge fight because what the Democrats wanted to do, and a lot of the rhinos wanted to do, was they wanted open borders so they could bring in voters.
So you think that's the fundamental motivation for that, for the
Yeah.
voters?
Money and voters. They wanted to control the electorate forever. And in the rhinos, they didn't care. They're like, yeah, we'll have a couple seats, but we'll let you take over the government. It would have been a Democratic government, like we saw under Joe Biden when he did get in the in through a stolen election in 2021.
Oh. Now, if you fast forward to Biden's administration, do you feel like he was just continuing and scaling up what Obama had done?
Right. He was doing that. Pope Francis was going around the world doing all this PR for him. We got to let the migrants, run wild. And everybody saw it. And the thing was, the press wasn't covering it. Like I said, my job was to be on the borderline, basically, the referee between the press and the White House in the early years. By the time I got to the point of writing these books, the press had completely capitulated. They had surrendered their integrity. They were letting the White House do whatever they want, and they weren't reporting the truth. That's why we had to write these books. That's why I had to write the Substack. That's the only place you can go to get the truth.
And under Biden's administration, I just have a vague sense of this, but my understanding is a lot of Catholic nonprofits were profiting from this, right? So they were getting a lot of money, like Catholic Charities, wasn't that one of them?
Yeah, U.S.
Because they were helping facilitate the movement of people, right?
Right. U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, Catholic Relief Services, both were known intimately by McCarrick. When he set up the Alliance for Prosperity in 2014, they were on the launch pad to get a lot of funding, government funding. When Biden came in as president, that funding level took off for them. The church, I think, some estimates are $3.5 billion in government funding went to the Catholic Church for these non-government organizations to, facilitate migrants and all this trafficking through the country. And so that's when Trump got elected in 2024. He stood up to it, and the country saw it. So we had to stand up to it and say, we can't have any more of this.
Wow. So I was wondering if we could move on to talk a bit about Ukraine.
Yeah.
That's the next big area in your book that you cover. The Obama administration helping to set up these bioweapon research labs there.
Right.
So could you just explain a bit about that? What was going on there and how it unfolded?
So my first time with Biden and the Ukraine. So I'll talk a little bit about right now. There's a war going on. It's top of line news, right? Russia, are they going to get out of Ukraine? Are they not going to get out of Ukraine? What is Ukraine? The first time I understood what Joe Biden was about was I traveled to Moscow with him in 2011. And I watched him in a meeting, one-on-one, in a group meeting with Vladimir Putin. And Vladimir Putin publicly humiliated him. And I wrote about that in my book, The Case to Impeach and Imprison. I'm sorry, the Joe Biden Authorized. I wrote about that. And it was shocking to me. I've been in a lot of world leader meetings as a stenographer. I'd seen it all around the world. I'd never seen one world leader treat another world leader that badly. And Joe Biden took it and just tried to shrug it off and work with Putin. So I knew there was bad blood between them. In 2014, Ukraine hits. Hunter Biden is getting money from Burisma. But Hunter Biden is on the launch pad to become financially supported by Burisma Holdings. There's a board member on Burisma Holdings who's an old friend of Joe Biden. His name's Alexander Kwasniewski. He's a Polish guy, former president of Poland. And he invites Hunter Biden and his friend Devin Archer to go and become board members. Eventually they do. As this is unfolding, that's when Putin knows they're going criminal. So he's like, well, I'm going to go into Ukraine myself. He invades Crimea and just takes it without a shot and then starts going into other parts of Ukraine. So the fight in Ukraine right now is over the area that was controlled the mineral rights, the natural gas holdings of the company that Hunter Biden was on the board of, Burisma Holdings. It's called the Donbass. There's all this wealth in natural gas reserves there, and that's what Putin wants. And he's not leaving until he gets it. And basically, Joe Biden and Hunter Biden cut themselves in on getting a piece of the action while Joe Biden was going back and forth as the vice president who was helping Ukraine.
So Hunter was making money on the board of Burisma, but so that's one part of it. That's one part of the corruption, right?
Right.
Another part that you talk about is the setting up the bioweapons labs, right?
Right. So there were a series of meetings. So this is what I found in the Hunter Biden laptop. This is what I write about in my Substack, Midnight in the Laptop of Good and Evil. In early April 2014, this invasion is going off in Ukraine. Joe Biden is planning a trip there. Hunter Biden and his friend Devin Archer are hosting a company in their office in D.C. The office is run by Hunter Biden's Rosemont Seneca Partners, LLC. And the company that's hosting there is called Metabiota. Metabiota at the time is a global virus investigator. They investigate viruses. And so they're interested in going into Ukraine. So when Joe Biden, a week before Joe Biden goes to Ukraine on April 21st, 2014, I was on that trip with him. And I told investigators in the Congress about it. They don't really want to do much more with it than me tell them about it. He was hosting in the White House, Devin Archer and Hunter Biden, and they were talking about their emails back and forth between them. We're going to join the board of Burisma, and we're going to get funding. We're doing a funding tranche to support Metabiota. And people that were in the group that was investing in Metabiota had White House tours with Joe Biden's staffers right before Joe Biden went on this trip to Ukraine. So there was a lot of information, a lot of cross-pollination, we'll call it, between the two groups. The scary thing about Metabiota was they had been in China for years. So I'm going to go quickly to China.
But was Metabiota, was it a Ukrainian? No, you said they wanted to get into was it an American company or?
American company they're a biowarfare company from Silicon Valley.
Okay.
So just real quick about how Metabiota developed. In 2011, Joe Biden goes to China. I'm on that trip. He's in August of 2011. He goes to China. At this point in time, based on what's in the Hunter Biden laptop, emails back and forth, Hunter Biden is already getting money from the Chinese. Joe goes over there to do dirty business. On that trip, he tells the Chinese at a speech in Sichuan University in Chengdu, China, you have too many old people. You have too many old people. They had a one-child policy in China for years, and for like 20 years, or 2 generations, 30 years. Because of that, they didn't have any babies, but they had all these old people. That's August of 2011. At that time, Metabiota was a biowarfare contractor working in China, and they were going around trying to find viruses. That the idea was, hey, we're going to find these viruses, we're going to catalog them, and we're going to predict where pandemics come from. One of the things they were looking for viruses in was bats. So in 2013, in December of 2013, just before they get involved in Ukraine and Burisma, Joe Biden and Hunter Biden on the trip goes to Beijing. I'm on that trip also. They go to Beijing and they're talking to Xi Jinping, and he's the president.
He was the vice president then, right?
He was the president then.
He was. Okay.
He moved up earlier, and they're talking to him. There's photos of Joe and Hunter talking to Xi Jinping on that trip. And so they come back from that trip, and Hunter Biden and his Rosemont Seneca Technology Partners Group starts investing in Metabiota. Metabiota at the time is in China looking at bat viruses. They're working with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. They're working with Eco Health Alliance, all these bad guys that were part of this Wuhan Plandemic. That's who they were working with. And then they go in to Hunter's office in DC, meet with Joe's people in the White House, and start setting up the biolabs. So there's Wuhan's Chinese investigations, and there's biolabs in Ukraine. And oh, by the way, Metabiota is involved in the Ebola outbreak in Africa. It kicks off in 2014 in April. So in the fall of 2014, as they're setting up the Alliance for Prosperity with all this human trafficking, these kids across the border, they also set up Joe Biden's operative, Ron Klain, comes into the White House and becomes the Ebola czar. And that's what starts, in my opinion, the Wuhan Plandemic.
I'm just curious, do you remember, this was probably 4 years ago? I think it was Project Veritas at the time, released these documents. They were from DARPA, and someone had put, do you remember that? And the documents, I actually have them on my hard drive. I downloaded them and read them all. And it basically, Peter Daszak, the guy that runs that Eco Health Alliance,
right?
DARPA actually had an RFP, a request for proposals, that they had put out. And it was basically they were inviting people around the world to do research on, viruses that animal viruses that might be at risk for jumping to humans.
Yeah, SARS-CoV-2 viruses, SARS viruses. Yeah.
Were they? Okay, so Peter Daszak proposed doing research, setting up research at the Wuhan lab and looking at bat viruses. And if you read all the documents, there were some internal discussions in DARPA, and they basically said, no, this is too dangerous. We're going to decline this.
Right.
So they declined it. And then I guess Daszak must have taken the same proposal to Anthony Fauci, and he approved it.
So what happened was, in the fall of 2014, because Ron Klain gets named the Ebola czar, Ebola is running wild. And people here are really scared. He's going to come here. We're going to have a pandemic. He brings in Fauci, and Fauci becomes the healthcare superhero of 2014 because he solves Ebola. But the White House uses that crisis to get a huge jump in funding through USAID for global viral research. That's the money. They get $200 million that fall. That's the money that went to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And because Klain and Fauci were working together in 2014 and Ebola was so big, the CIA gets involved through something called In-Q-Tel. In the Hunter Biden laptop, there's emails from this Rosemont Seneca Technology Partner. So they've gone from setting up the biolabs in Ukraine, and they're like, hey, we got an email from this person at In-Q-Tel. Let's put them in touch with the Ebola czar, and let's get them to invest in us. In-Q-Tel is the venture capital arm of the CIA. So they are in contact with Hunter Biden and Rosemont Seneca Technology Partners in 2014. And what happens is, for some reason, somebody outed Hunter Biden as being this cocaine fiend in the Navy, and he gets kicked out of the Navy. So he gets kicked out of Rosemont Seneca Technology Partners, and that whole process goes on without him. Devin Archer leaves voluntarily, and it goes on without him. But the CIA winds up investing in this company, Metabiota, in 2017, after Trump comes in through Mike Pompeo. So Metabiota, the global viral surveillance program, it's called there's Predict 2. At that point, it's Predict 2. Gets kicked off. So this is something that's significant about Predict 1, Predict 2. Predict 1 comes in, and it's set up in 2009. In 2009, there's a bunch of money getting its Predict 1. That funding runs out in 2014. Just as soon as the money's about to run out, that's when the Ebola crisis hits. That funding level, then Predict 2 gets funded for 5 years. From 2014, just as that funding runs out, is September of 2019. And Trump comes in, he says, I'm not renewing that funding. We're not going to renew that funding. We're stopping all funding for this global virus surveillance. And that's why they said Trump shut down the viral surveillance. It wasn't, it's what he shut down was this scam that the Bidens were running.
Wow. Mike, we have 2 questions from the audience, and I want to invite the audience. We'll take any questions you have for Mike, but let me just pull up these questions and see what people are. I'm not sure what this is asking. From your experience, do you think it's pandemic among Americans? I guess this person is asking if the kids were being trafficked across the border for, sexual exploitation by elites is what they're asking.
Yeah, I think that's what happened with it certainly happened once Biden came in as president. I think it was underway in the Alliance for Prosperity, not to the extent that it was after 2021. And that's why Trump wanted to put up the wall. And he did. He did a good job of putting up the wall. And basically, he kind of revealed the corruption that was in this Honduran government. He arrested the brother of the president of Honduras and put him on trial. So he was the one who was sort of working to undermine this corruption that was in Central America and all this cartel corruption. But they did a lot of trafficking then through 2016 up until then. And then from 2021 to 2024, it was horrific. Yes. And the Catholic Church was part of it. Other religious organizations were part of it. They were all part of it. They didn't care. And the CIA was part of it. They were helping smuggle drugs and smuggle families. Well, not families as much, some families, but women and children. And there was a lot of, unaccompanied minors were smuggled across the border. That's where all these numbers come from, unfortunately.
Do you think that Cardinal McCarrick, you had mentioned that he was a pedophile. Do you think that was part of his motivation and interest in supporting this?
Yeah, I think he was doing it for a long time in a lot of different entities around the world through the Catholic Church.
Okay, we have another question. Someone asks, have you looked into the child trafficking through Catholic social services? Also, how in Cincinnati, it says, how the Archbishop with Mike DeWine, our governor, in Ohio 3 days before they shut down Ohio. I think she's referring to the shutting down Ohio in terms of the pandemic. So The first question is, have you looked into the child trafficking through Catholic social services?
Yeah, there's a ton of it. And that's why we had to elect Trump. One of the things they did in 2014 was they moved a guy who was an archbishop from San Francisco down to San Diego. His name's Robert McElroy. So Bishop McElroy. They put him on the border of San Diego, and that's where all the drug and human that's where the worst incidences of drugs and human smuggling took place for the next 4 years, all during the Biden time. He's now the Archbishop of Washington. They moved him to Washington to watch things here with the government. And they've done that all around the world. They put people in place of sensitive locations that can facilitate human trafficking. That's Catholic Church. The other terrible thing that was done by the Pope in March of 2020. In March of 2020, as the pandemic is sort of being discussed, the panic button is starting to get, go up. The panic level is starting to rise. Pope Francis walks out to the Vatican and shuts down the Catholic Church, all services and all Catholic activities worldwide for like 3 weeks. And that's what sent people home. That was the morality laundering. And that's the worst thing he could have done. That was absolute evil. This is not the actions of a pope who cares about his church. This is the action of someone who's doing evil to destroy his church. And he did.
Mm. And he was also, you're saying also he was trying to support the larger movement, like the governments around the world who were shutting things down.
Yeah, they wanted to shut things down so they could run this, all this mail-in ballot fraud. That's what they did. Joe Biden, one of the things I talk about in the book that I came out with in 2020, and Joe Biden Unauthorized, he wasn't capable physically or mentally of being president. If he had to actually run a presidential campaign that I've worked on too. I worked on the re-election campaign of George Bush in 2004, worked on two from inside the White House, and the re-election of Barack Obama in 2012. It's a physically demanding, mentally demanding process. He didn't do that. They shut down the globe, and the guy who shut it down was Ron Klain. He shut that down. He was his chief advisor on that, and he became his White House chief of staff. That was his dream job. So this is the devious, insidious background of these people that shut the world down in 2020.
Mm. We have 2 more questions right now. And again, I invite other people to submit questions if you have them. This person says they watched Tucker Carlson's series on 9/11. It is not complimentary of Bush and the Obama administration. Did you sense that these high-level officials like Rice, Tenet, etc., were not truthful? Was this all done for Great Britain and indirectly Israel?
Yes. I wouldn't say Great Britain and Israel. What I know about the campaign to kill Osama bin Laden was, I uncovered evidence. It's in my Substack. Osama bin Laden was in Pakistan in 2005, and they knew it. Because in 2005, Dick Cheney flew a helicopter right over the town where Osama bin Laden would later be killed, Abbottabad. And I was in that helicopter, behind his. So we were on a trip. And I think the reason he took the trip in 2005 was to go to Pakistan, tell them, take care of Osama bin Laden, keep him on ice. We're going to keep this war going. We're not pulling our troops out of here. Our people are still out in the field in harm's way, and we don't care. And that's what happened. And so I think that's what Tucker Carlson was looking at. I disagree with one of the guys that spoke with Tucker Carlson. He said that he thought Osama bin Laden was in Iran. I think Osama bin Laden was in Pakistan from 2005 on.
Someone else asks, are you Catholic?
Yes, I'm Catholic. I pray a rosary every day, and I returned to the church as a devout Catholic about 2 years ago in Lent of 2024. I just needed to return to the church, and I did. It's been very good for me. And like I said, I went back to church, and that's when I felt like this. I told this to Archbishop Vigano. When God is behind you, he's on your team, you're on his team, you're working for him. I feel like that's what we're doing.
Oh. I wanted to ask you also, going back to setting up the bio weapons research, Ukraine, I could be misremembering. I don't know if I read this in your book or if I read commentary about your book, but do you get into the fact that they might have done this to just create tension with Russia? So that Russia felt like there was this bioweapons risk right at their border?
Yeah, that was a big part of it. I mean, so Joe Biden goes back 50 years with Russia. I mean, he came into the Senate in 1972. So during that time, they were getting rid of the missile, the de-escalation of the nuclear threat and all that stuff. Well, after the wall came down in the 90s, then they had to go after biological threats. So that's when they started, doing all this stuff where they started this center in Tbilisi, Georgia, called the Lugar Center for Medical Research or something like that. Well, Joe Biden visited there in 2009, and it really got the Russians mad. because they thought that we were doing biowarfare research there. And then they moved it into Ukraine in 2014, and that got them even more mad. So Putin invades Crimea, and he's got this, army of separatists, Russian-speaking Ukrainian separatists fighting in the Donbass, and they're still fighting. That's what the fight is about right now. Millions of people have been killed because of Joe Biden's greed and criminal activity in Ukraine. And, one of the things that happened was when Putin invaded Ukraine in 2022, Biden bugged everybody out of the embassy and burned all the documents. They burned up all the evidence of his crimes. That's what they did there.
We have more questions here. Why were the January 6th tapes withheld from the public? Who withheld them? Have they been destroyed? I don't know if you can answer that.
I don't know anything about that.
Okay. Someone else asks, you speak well. Did this come from listening and recording high-level political people as a compliment? Do people suggest that never mind that comment.
Okay.
So
thanks for the compliment.
Okay. No, that's it. I was wondering also about, you mentioned eventually, was it Q-Intel the CIA's
In-Q-Tel.
Okay, gotcha. So In-Q-Tel, do you think that they would have invested? They came in sort of late into this, investing into the bioweapons. I forget the name of the company now, but the one that Hunter Biden was
Metabiota.
They came in sort of late in the game. But do you have a sense for what their motivation was, and if they might have moved the company in a different direction or used it as a cover for taking another initiative or action?
I think it was used as a cover. There's a name of a person named Tara O'Toole. She's a CIA In-Q-Tel person. She was brought on to work with biowarfare prevention in 2014 after Ebola. She either was a traitor or she was terrible at her job and should be fired. I don't think she's been fired. And we haven't heard her name. You don't hear her name in the media. We should hear her name. She was the one who was monitoring global viral surveillance while this virus erupted on her watch. And I talk about her at length in the book. And so I think Mike Pompeo has some questions to answer. There's been a lot of treason in our government. We're starting to get to the bottom of it. And frankly, Joe Biden, in my mind, committed treason with the Chinese. Mike Pompeo committed treason in this. And I would say Tara O'Toole did too. They were working with the Chinese to let this happen.
Well, also, I wanted to ask you, I mentioned that the documents from DARPA that Project Veritas released, right? Showing that DARPA put out an RFP, a request for proposals, to do this virus research around the world, right? And to say, we imagine that viruses will jump from animals to humans. Let's accelerate that process in a research lab, right? Develop the evolved virus that will jump, and then develop vaccines. Their stated purpose for this research was to develop the vaccine. But I'm wondering, do you assume it was really just to develop the bioweapon? That they didn't care about the vaccine. It's really to develop bioweapons.
Yeah. So I think what you're talking about is EcoHealth Alliance put out the RFP.
No, they responded to DARPA's RFP.
They responded to DARPA.
I'll send you the document. Yeah, the whole idea was that EcoHealth Alliance submitted a proposal in response to an RFP. I've got the documents. And what was really going on with this release of documents through someone released them like a whistleblower anonymously.
Yeah. There's a Marine colonel, and the guy still hasn't really been
Colonel Murphy. Right. But what he did was he was an intern at DARPA, and he was actually writing a memo to higher level military brass saying, look, we don't want to mandate this vaccine for our troops because it has this dangerous spike protein it's so dangerous that we rejected the proposal that we got from Dazik, but that proposal from Dazik was a response to an RFP. It really was, and I'll send it to you just to. I'm not crazy. I remember this.
Okay, so I haven't seen that. I do know there's a Marine colonel. I did an interview with the guy who was an admiral in the Navy, Rear Admiral Stephen Redd. He was one of the guys that was standing in the background at those pandemic briefings they had with Fauci. He was the guy wearing the Navy. He was a Navy liaison between the Centers for Disease Control and the Pentagon. He was a key guy. And I asked him a bunch of stuff because in 2014, he was in a bunch of meetings in the White House Situation Room with Fauci and Clay, and he wouldn't remember them. He wouldn't admit to remembering them. So I know that this process was underway. The military was involved in it. One of the things I asked him about was were the Chinese doing research? And he said, yeah, the Chinese were doing research on stuff, and we knew what it was, and we have stuff that the military uses that no one else has. Like, we have it. And I was like, okay. So, that's in my Substack in the, archives.
Wow. We have some more questions here. Someone asks, if you were aware of all these happenings, why didn't you blow the whistle earlier?
I didn't know about any of this until I got my hands on the Hunter Biden laptop in 2021. And as soon as I did, I blew the whistle. It took from 2021 until the spring of 2023 for me to figure out how to get in front of media because no one wanted to report on this. So what I had to do was I wrote a tip to the FBI. And the FBI said, I saw Joe Biden commit a crime on Air Force Two in April of 2014 when he was vice president. He committed that crime in tandem with Jake Sullivan. That crime is the conspiracy that's covering up that crime is still ongoing. I never heard back from the FBI. So I went to Fox News. I was on Fox News with Jesse Waters a bunch. There was a big article about me in the New York Post. That led to me being interviewed by the Congress. They didn't want to do anything with what I told them. They want to cover this up. The media wants to cover this up. They don't want this out there. I write about it in the Substack, and my Substack gets to a certain point, and then it starts losing people. So it's not like there's a suppression of information underway. If you want to help me out, sign up for my Substack. Sign up for classes with you guys, and help me out by signing up my Substack. Substack midnight in a laptop of good and evil. You can be a free subscriber. You can be a paid subscriber.
Okay. Because the next question here is, I would like to get in touch with the author. I used to be the church militant group resistance leader for Cincinnati. How can I get in touch with him? So would it be through your Substack?
Yeah, go through the Substack. Yeah. Okay. Sign up for the Substack, and then you can, you can message me through the Substack.
Okay. All right. Well, we don't have any more questions, Mike, and I think we've covered everything. Please let us know how to purchase the author's books.
Books are on Amazon. The book is An Almost Insurmountable Evil, How Obama's Deep State Defiled the Catholic Church and Executed the Wuhan Plandemic. And then the one about Burisma, and that has a lot of information about the background information on the Alliance for Prosperity, is a case to impeach and imprison Joe Biden.
Okay, great. Well, this was fantastic, Mike. We really, really appreciate it. And I want to encourage everyone to subscribe to Mike's Substack. So
yeah, I got an interesting thing coming out about the CIA and Hollywood and what they did with Robert Redford.
Really?
Yes.
Are you working on another book?
Not working on a book right now.
No. Okay.
I actually have a novel that I'm coming out with pretty soon.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
Great. Oh, fantastic. All right. Well, thanks again, Mike. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mike. It was great to be on with you guys.